Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
Well, Joe, a really exciting time to be a Braves fan. Almost feeling like it's the 90s again. Hopefully it's not feeling like it was last year where the Braves got to a 3-1 lead against the Dodgers and then blew it. But I've been really impressed with the moxie of this team coming from 88 win regular season, getting a hard fought win against the Brewers where they had to get a walk-off home run by Freddie Freeman. And the first two games they won this series against the Dodgers where they got a 2-0 lead. Just fantastic baseball games. And you've had two guys that are good players, but one that's been great for the Braves the whole year, and Austin Riley, and then another one that's a new addition, Rosario, have epic performances. Of course, game one where the Braves won by one run. Austin Riley was responsible for, I believe, all three runs, or at least 3 out of 4 runs. Had a 2-run home run, then of course had the RBI at the end to win it. Off a reliever who last year just caused them all kinds of troubles. And then, of course, then game two right there, Rosario just played excellent, and he was responsible for 3 runs. And then, of course, they dropped the one last night, which I didn't watch, where they blew a 5-2 lead. And now, Braves fans, you might be kind of scared because the Braves are yet again winning 5-2, but let's see if they can hold it on. And, Joe, I think that with the makeup of this team and what they went through last year, I think if they get up to a 3-1 lead this time, if they can win tonight, I think this time they're going to the World Series.
It does feel different on a positive note. And I think another added factor is that the Braves have home field advantage in this series since they were the division champs and the Dodgers with 106 wins with a wild card. But, hey, I'm not going to apologize because our teams have definitely been burned like that in the past. We can think about the Saints having to go on the road. Yep. So I'm definitely not going to complain about that. But, yeah, it feels different this year because the Braves would get that game 6 at home. Even if they lose a game 5, they go up 3-1. I think the home crowd would make a difference because last year they were playing the playoffs at a neutral site. And so you didn't have that home field advantage, which I think helped the Dodgers come back from that 3-1 lead. But you talked about Austin Riley and Rosario. Real quick on those guys, Rosario's just been a very underrated pickup for the Braves. Because remember, when Ronald Acuna Jr. got hurt, they had to pretty much revamp their outfield on the fly due to those injuries. And they brought in Rosario, who was injured when they traded from him from Cleveland. And he's the guy that I think 2 or 3 years ago hit 30-plus home runs with the Twins. And so he's a really good player. And so now that he's fully healthy, we're starting to see, why that was such like a sneaky good trade pickup. And then on Austin Riley, did you know that he's from North Mississippi and he was actually committed to go play college baseball at Mississippi State out of high school? Of course, he was signed by the Braves and that never happened. I can imagine how good he would have been on some of those Mississippi State teams. But, yeah, I mean, the Atlanta offense is really good. And then the other thing that's been really impressive is their pitching staff kind of coming together against a really good Dodgers team, obviously.
Definitely. And, something that I've been finding amazing, too, is the base running they've had, how bold they've been with their decisions. I was about to throw things that third base coach a couple times in that game, too, where he was sending Albies to run when it looked like he was going to be out. I mean, he got safe on all those, but I got to say that this Braves team is fearless and they're aggressive. And you know what? Maybe they needed a little bit more of that last year. So I can say this, it's definitely a little bit reckless, but when you're playing a team that is so talented like the Dodgers are, you got to pull all the stops out, and that's what they're doing right now.
Yeah, you got to take chances. I mean, the Dodgers are too good. You think about the offense they have. You think about the pitching staff with Scherzer and Buehler and Urias. I mean, this is a talented team, obviously. And their bullpen's been really good. But the third base coach for the Braves, Ron Washington, having him is a very underrated tool because he's a former manager with the Texas Rangers. He led the Rangers to those 2 back-to-back World Series appearances in 2010 and 2011. So having him is just such a luxury at third base.
I thought he looked familiar to me. It had been a long time since I even thought about Ron Washington. But, yeah, he was a very consistent manager of the Rangers. I remember that.
I should have won a World Series against the Cardinals if not for David Freese.
That's right. Well, so we'll see what happens in game 5 tonight or in game 4 tonight. This is a really big game for the Braves. I think a 3-1 lead is very necessary against a team like the Dodgers. And yeah, I just feel like there's a whole new level of belief because last year was their first year really kind of coming out and becoming a good baseball team again. And this year I felt like, they underperformed, but then at the end of the year when they had to, they picked it up. And I think there's a lot more grit and the experience right there is now at this present. You can see there's a lot more belief now having been there before. And I think this 3-1 lead would feel much different than it did last year.
It really would. And Jock Peterson is another difference maker with his playoff experience. He's really helped a lot too.
That home run that he hit the other night of 450 feet. I mean, I could not believe how far that thing traveled. He's been really striking the ball lately in October.
Yes, Jocktober they call it.
Jocktober. Well, so we'll see what the Braves can do. Hopefully they hold on tonight because it would be such a great thing to see the Braves have a 3-1 lead and bring it back to Atlanta. And you're right, Joe, the crowds they've had in Atlanta supporting them, getting to hear the and see the chop again. I mean, it's just great. I mean, it's been so long since I've gotten to see that and feel it in October, and it just makes me think of my childhood now.
I'm really excited.
All right. Well, switching over back to another thing we're excited about, it's college football. One thing I want to start off is one of my passions. You might say that it's a negative, but I think it's fun. We're talking about sports gambling. And Joe and I try to help all of our fellow gamblers out there with our lines of the week. So if you're going to Biloxi, Tunica, or if you're being bold and going out to Vegas, here's what we think is a good line to make if you're going to go hit up the sports book. Joe, one of the surprises of America right now and in the ACC are the NC State Wolfpack. Been a very impressive football team, which looking back, how did they lose to Mississippi State? I have no idea how they lost that game. It makes no sense to me. They beat a Clemson team pretty handily. And last week, Joe, frankly, I'll be honest, I picked against them. I picked Boston College on the money line. They destroyed Boston College, who looks like a pretty good team. It was a team that beat Missouri, which obviously Missouri has shown themselves to not be a great football team. But, Boston College looked good, and NC State is really, with the exception of that one head-scratching loss to Mississippi State, been the class of the ACC. They're going against Miami, who has been maybe the most disappointing team in America this year. I would say it's between them and fellow ACC member North Carolina for most disappointing football team with a lot of promise and expectation. And Miami right now is 2-4. The most memorable thing they've had all season was somebody catching a cat that fell down in the stadium. It's been a bad year for Miami football. But somehow with all that, with what is admittedly, when Miami is not a good football team, a pathetic home atmosphere. I mean, people don't attend Miami football games when they're not very good, and it's not a very electric atmosphere. So in a home game for Miami against NC State, who is 6-1 right now, a top 20 team, probably should be a little higher. NC State is only favored by 3 points. Joe, this is a travesty. NC State is going to wipe the floor with this Miami team. I say you lay the 3, take the Wolfpack, and this is Dan's line of the week, and you can put a lot of money on this one.
I think that's a good pick. I think we were talking about that before the show. I really like, NC State in that game as well. The one I'm going to go with, I kind of struggled this week because there's not really as many high-octane, interesting matchups nationally. So I kind of went with like a random matchup, staying with a ranked team, playing a non-ranked team. I've got San Diego State against Air Force. It's at Air Force. San Diego State's, of course, undefeated, ranked number 22. Air Force is like 5-1 or 6-1 this year. I'm kind of feeling like Air Force, they always have a unique offense. I think they can pull off this upset. I would go with Air Force to win this game.
Joe, I'm a big fan of laying the service academies. I bet on Army a whole lot, and they usually works out pretty good for me. A lot of times it's under bets, but the last couple of years they've been such a solid product that with Monken that I bet them a lot. So I never think it's a bad idea to bet them because when you look at service academies from Air Force, Navy to Army, They are very disciplined, which, hey, you know where that comes from. That comes from the military training. They don't miss a lot of tackles, don't have a lot of penalties. Usually their defenses are very solid, and they're not going to give up a lot of points because they run ball control possession offenses. So I think that's always a good play right there, and I think that could be a good upset pick. In that same vein, I will say, Joe, that one of the hot takes that I had on my board is I liked Army on the money line against Wisconsin. For anyone that's interested, Wisconsin is favored by 3. This Wisconsin team, of course, they could arguably be the biggest disappointment of the year too, because they're 2-4 right now. They've lost some close games, but they also got killed by Notre Dame. And meanwhile, Army, not as good as they have been the last couple of years, but they've gotten so close lately, Joe, to beating, Army and Wisconsin. That was last week. Army against Wake Forest. Army was coming off the close loss to Wisconsin, but now they're taking on a Wake Forest team who's undefeated. And I was going to say, I mean, Wake Forest has been living by the skin of their chinny chin chin this year, winning all these tight games. You know, Army's due to beat a Power 5 team, a good one. They've been so close the last few years, starting with that Michigan game. They almost did it last week, and I kind of think they're going to break through this week. So kind of my bonus extra pick is with Joe's line, speaking of the service academies beating top 25 teams, I think it might be time for a double up on that. Why don't you take Army to beat Wake Forest straight up in a huge upset?
Yeah, I like that one as well. I actually came really close to going with that one because it just kind of feels like Wake Forest is kind of on borrowed time.
All right, Joe, speaking of big upset potential, we're fair on the show. Some have said that we're the most biased show on the internet radio. I don't think that's true. Upset watch, Ole Miss. Ole Miss taking on LSU right now. Of course, we're not sure about the health of Matt Corral. LSU, from a motivational standpoint, don't really know where they are. So Coach O got fired, but they're letting him coach out the rest of the season. Of course, they suddenly found something with their running back Price, who had 287 yards out of nowhere against Florida. Ole Miss's run defense is nothing that's to be too excited about or write home about. Last year, of course, LSU beat Ole Miss in an absolutely insane football game where Matt Corral threw 6 touchdowns and threw 4 interceptions or something. I mean, it was a nuts football game. They did the same thing last year, coming off a big win against Florida. This is a weird spot, Joe. Ole Miss is favored by 2 touchdowns, but without having Corral as the known starting quarterback, kind of a scary game that makes me a little worried.
I mean, if Corral doesn't start, Ole Miss has no chance. They just can't do it with the backup quarterback. I think he has some talent, but there's a reason why people are saying watch the transfer portal for next year's Ole Miss starting quarterback more than likely. And so I think that when you look at Corral, even if he plays, he probably will be a little bit banged up coming off that Tennessee game, obviously won't be 100%. At the end of the day, I still think if Corral plays, Ole Miss probably wins. I think that there's some motivation in this game for Kiffin against Orgeron because it's probably his last chance against Orgeron for a while in that matchup. And they have a lot of history together going back to Tennessee, USC. Those days. I also just think that, the game being at Ole Miss helps Ole Miss. Ole Miss historically has, trouble when it's in Baton Rouge, like most teams do. But when it's in Oxford, Ole Miss, usually when they're the better team, beats them in Oxford. So I'm going to say Ole Miss wins, but probably a close game. For Ole Miss, the game that I'm the most concerned about is the Auburn game on the road. Like, if I look at the rest of their schedule, that's the game where I'm like, I don't see a path to victory. The rest of the games, I'm kind of like, it's a little bit more of a pick'em game.
Well, Joe, here's the thing that I see in this game. I see a team in LSU that are really questioning their motivation. Had they not fired Orgeron last week, I may actually be picking LSU to win this game. But because they did, I really think that you're going to see a lot of opt-outs this week, a lot of guys not wanting to play. And I just think that was a terrible move on so many levels. I think that even if Matt Corral doesn't play, I still give Ole Miss a slight edge because I think one thing you can do against LSU is you can run the ball a little bit if you have good running backs. I think they really need to focus on Ely and Connor and Parrish this week and, maybe get some easy passes for their quarterback. But one thing that, until last week, LSU had been very one-dimensional, and Ole Miss just really needs to be aggressive on defense. And I think if they can get to Max Johnson a little bit, which LSU gives up some of the most sacks in America, then that's a good thing that you can do. And I really think that we're going to use the run game this week to get an easy win. And probably, you know what, I could see this being a game where I didn't really look at the over-under on this yet, but this might be a solid under pick because I kind of think that Ole Miss is going to win this game in a little bit more of an old school football style with a lot of running the ball and maybe a little bit more possession of the clock.
I could see kind of like a 31-24 game. That's kind of where I'm kind of standing, maybe 34-27, maybe 7 points or so, a little bit lower score and not really, up there like in the high 40s or anything like that, like we saw with Ole Miss, Arkansas, like in the low 50s. I think the biggest concern, with Ole Miss, besides health, the corral, and some of the other players, is, the running back for LSU, to your earlier point. Ole Miss does have a bad track record, of letting running backs look really good. Like I can remember Darius Geis, Leonard Fournette just playing out of their minds against Ole Miss in this Magnolia Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, even going last year, yeah, that's right. It's a good point. I mean, LSU in general, I was at that one with Fournette where he had almost 300 yards rushing. I mean, he just shredded the Ole Miss defense. I think that I see Ole Miss. I'm going to give them the edge on this one, 28-27. So really tight game here.
That'd be a great game.
All right, Joe. Moving on, another one that I wanted to talk about. We talked a little bit about Army and Wake Forest. I mistakenly mentioned earlier with Wisconsin. What do you see with this Purdue team coming off a huge win over Iowa? Do you think they can get Wisconsin and stay in the top 25 and maybe be a kind of a dark horse in that other side of the Big Ten?
I mean, I'd like to see that. Yeah, I kind of like to see the changing of the guard and not just the same old faces like Ohio State every year. But more than likely, it kind of feels like over the last, decade or so, this is kind of game that Purdue loses. When they win a big game, they usually are kind of down the next week. And so it wouldn't surprise me if Wisconsin won this game.
Yeah, Joe, I'm going to take Purdue to win this only because Wisconsin just seems like a lost team to me. But I would not be at all shocked if they were to win this game, Wisconsin, because this is kind of a typical game that Wisconsin would usually win. Joe, like looking on, is there any other games that you're really interested in that you want to talk about? I mean, Alabama and Tennessee is one that I'm interested to kind of see where Tennessee is at after such a heartbreaking loss last week and such a disgusting display by their fans. Is this a game in Knoxville or is it in Tuscaloosa?
It's in Tuscaloosa.
Okay. I would have loved it if it would have been in Knoxville because that would have been really interesting to see what kind of atmosphere that they put out there after this past week. I don't know, man. I'm interested. I'm not slightly interested by this game. Maybe the most I've kind of been interested in this rivalry in a long time. And when I say rivalry, let me put huge air quotes on this because can you really call a game a rivalry when one team has won 15 in a row?
Yeah, you can't. It kind of feels like every year when this game happens, it's almost like Alabama's playing like a yearly non-conference opponent. Like it just doesn't have that feel, of what it used to have in yesteryear. And so, yeah, I think Alabama will definitely win this game, but I think it's intriguing to see how Tennessee comes back. And then also everybody's still kind of trying to figure out what this Alabama's team's, identity is, like how good they really are compared to some of these other SEC teams.
Yeah, Joe. And I think that Alabama will win. I kind of think that this could be a game where Tennessee might be able to keep it close for a little bit. Especially if Hendon Hooker is healthy. I think that's the biggest thing because we saw Hendon Hooker. I mean, he put up such a valiant effort last week. He saw with torn pants. I mean, the guy did everything he could to get that win for Tennessee. And he looks pretty shaken up at the end of the game. Of course, they had to put Joe Milton in and what was really a great performance until that last play when I don't know why he ran out of bounds or what he was thinking there. But if they can get Hendon Hooker back, Alabama's defense has shown they are a little bit susceptible. Maybe Tennessee can hang, but if they don't have Hendon Hooker, then it's probably blowout city for Alabama.
I think I saw Alabama was favored by 27, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure if Alabama covers that. Like I could see Tennessee keeping it like within 21, maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too. I kind of see a game that's like maybe 35-17 or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's a solid pick.
All right, Joe, the last one that I want to talk about today is let's go out to the West, and we're looking at UCLA and Oregon. These are both teams that started off the season super hot. Everyone was talking about the Pac-12's back, y'all. Look at it. We got two great teams. Oregon, they went out and beat up on Ohio State. Man, look at what UCLA did to Coach O. But they're not saying anything about sissy blue shirts now. Look how awesome we are at UCLA. Well, then Oregon goes and loses to Stanford. What? And then UCLA goes and loses 2 games. They get beat badly by Arizona State. And then they lose to, let me make even more of a face on this one, Fresno State. And this game is, it's going to be the game day game. I want to be more excited about this game. I just wish they hadn't lost those games. I was looking forward to this game for a long time, like in the beginning of the season. And now suddenly it feels like it's just the same old with the Pac-12. And I'd like to see UCLA win this game just so I can maybe see Chip Kelly take the next step. But it feels like it's not going to be quite the step that we thought it was going to be before the season.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of a hollow feeling compared to what we thought it was going to be. And really, the only reason game day is probably there is kind of by default because for 2 reasons. One, they want to make sure they have at least one Pac-12 West Coast trip this year. And then second, the weekend slate is just really that bad nationally. There's not really any other good games. I mean, there's a reason why Ole Miss LSU is the 2:30 game. You normally wouldn't expect that with LSU being 4-3. And so I think that at the end of the day, I'm going to go with Oregon. Like, I like Oregon's team better. I think that their defense is better. I like their running game a little bit better than UCLA. And then lastly, I just trust Oregon a little bit more than I do UCLA. I mean, that loss to Fresno State is just something I can't get past for UCLA.
Joe, this is a game where I'm taking UCLA because of injuries. Thibodeau has been hurt for a lot of the season. And more importantly, you're talking about Oregon's running game. CJ Verdell is out for the season. And that, to me, is the biggest factor in this game because I think I said that in the very beginning of the season. We were talking about the Ohio State-Oregon game, that Oregon can only go as far as CJ Verdell can take him. He's a great running back, and he is a real showstopper. And Oregon doesn't have quite the receiving talent that you would like to see them have. And from a quarterback standpoint, Justin Herbert's not back there. So really, Verdell was an important player. And I look at one thing that UCLA has, and they have an abundance of running back talent. Of course, the running back from Michigan has been so excellent this year that they had come in. I don't know why it's like his name, his last name is Charbonnet, Zach Charbonnet. Charbonnet has been excellent. And then the other one they have is also very good, the more power running back. And, DTR is very Bo Nix-ish. He's up and down. And sometimes he has great games. He makes questionable decisions. But it seems like a lot of times in these bigger games where they're the forefront of America, like LSU, he plays great. But then he has these bad games like he has against Fresno State or against, Arizona State. But I think this is going to be one where you got game day there. The lights are on. I think DTR is going to come out and play. I like Chip Kelly and UCLA to get this win over Oregon and end all chances that the Pac-12 has for a college football playoff team this year.
Yeah, that would pretty much end it for the Pac-12 at that point.
All right, Joe. Well, with that being said, unless you got any other games you want to talk about, then we're going to call it a night, and we'll be back next week.
Sounds good.
All right. And next week, of course, we're going to have a bigger slate. We're going to have Auburn, Ole Miss. So Joe and I get to hash out a little rivalry between us on that one. And we get to have some other games that we get to talk about. And want to thank everybody for listening. You can catch Nallis on YouTube. Check out our YouTube channel and subscribe to it. You can also watch and listen to all of our other episodes on Spotify. Search the Dan and Joe Sports Show on Spotify and follow us on Twitter at DJ Sports Show. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.